When you picture a Prohibition-era gangster, you probably think of Tommy guns, pinstripe suits, and brutal turf wars. But what if I told you the most fascinating part about these guys wasn't the crimes they committed, but the utterly bizarre, shockingly dumb, and downright weird habits they had behind the scenes? We're about to expose the 27 strangest gangster habits that prove the most feared men in history were also some of the most ridiculous. 1. You'd think men who built empires on cold, hard logic would trust their own judgment, right? Nope. They had a bizarre habit of outsourcing their most critical business decisions to psychics and fortune tellers. Forget Wall Street analysts. These guys had Madame Olga on speed dial. We're talking ruthless killers sitting in a dimly lit room, earnestly asking a woman with a crystal ball if the stars are aligned for a drive-by shooting. Madame Zora, should I invest in this illegal distillery? Or is Mercury in retrograde going to mess up my profit margins? These men wouldn't trust their own mother with the location of their secret stash, but they'd bet their entire operation on a tarot card reading. It's a stunning level of paranoia that proves, deep down, they knew their lives were just one random unlucky Tuesday away from disaster. 2. Al Capone, the man who gave Chicago its PhD in murder and mayhem, had a very strange side hustle. He was obsessed with milk. No, seriously. Apparently, a family member got sick from spoiled milk, and Capone took it personally. So, he bought a dairy and became the most terrifying public health advocate in history. He persuaded the city to slap expiration dates on every milk bottle. Can you even imagine that conversation? Listen, Mr. Mayor, public health is very important to me. If you don't pass this milk safety law, your own health might expire. He used his usual mob tactics to crush all competition, creating a dairy monopoly built on threats. He was literally making kids orphans with one hand and with the other making sure their breakfast milk was safe and full of calcium. The man was a walking, talking, murderous contradiction. 3. A gangster's car wasn't just a car, it was a rolling panic room with a V8 engine. They had a habit of getting their Cadillacs custom-built into mobile fortresses. We're talking bulletproof glass so thick you could barely see out of it, steel armor plates in the doors, and more secret compartments than a magician's coat. Hidden slots for Tommy guns, drop-down panels for shooting backwards, and sometimes even oil-slick dispensers. This wasn't Pimp My Ride. This was Pimp My Hearse in advance. Al Capone's famous caddy was painted the same green as the police cars, just to add another layer of confusion and pure, unadulterated menace. The statement was simple. You can try to kill me, but I've already spent a fortune making it really inconvenient for you. 4. So, you think prison is supposed to be punishment? That's cute. For top-tier gangsters, getting sentenced was less like going to jail and more like checking into a heavily fortified, all-inclusive resort where the guards are your butlers. They had a habit of turning their cells into luxury apartments that would make a Manhattan real estate agent weep with envy. Al Capone's cell, for example, looked less like a prison and more like a rich grandpa's study after he won the lottery. We're talking plush carpets, fancy armchairs, and a radio that cost more than the warden's car. They'd get gourmet steak dinners delivered, smoke the finest cigars, and basically run their criminal empires via a well-paid messenger service of prison guards. It's the ultimate power move. You're not just above the law, you're redecorating its waiting room and making its employees bring you slippers. 5. Some gangsters had a talent for pettiness that could win Olympic gold, like the weird habit of sending flowers to the funerals of people they absolutely hated. But not just any flowers. We're talking gigantic, over-the-top floral explosions that screamed, "Sorry for your loss, also I might have caused it." One guy sent a 6-foot-tall arrangement shaped like a middle finger made out of roses. Another sent orchids spelling out, "He should have ducked." This wasn't sympathy. This was gangster trolling with petals. Imagine being the poor funeral director trying to place a bouquet that looks like it came from a mafia-themed wedding gone wrong. And the best part? These guys signed the cards. No mystery, no subtlety, just pure, glorious mockery wrapped in baby's breath and passive aggression. 6. The paranoia of a top-tier gangster was legendary, and it wasn't just about bullets. It extended right to the dinner table. The most powerful bosses, like Frank Costello, developed the truly bizarre habit of employing a personal food taster. Let that sink in. This isn't a medieval king worried about being poisoned by a rival monarch. This is a guy from Brooklyn who made his fortune selling illegal booze, terrified that his spaghetti might be his last meal. Before the boss took a single bite of steak or a sip of wine, some poor schmuck had to taste it first to make sure it wasn't laced with arsenic. It's the ultimate sign you've made it to the top. You're so important that someone else has to risk explosive diarrhea or death just so you can enjoy dinner in peace. Trust was a commodity they simply couldn't afford, especially when it came to ravioli. 7. In the mob, getting a gift from the boss wasn't always a good thing. In fact, receiving a brand new car from a guy like Al Capone was a habit that often came with a terrifying subtext. It wasn't a generous bonus. It was a warning shot disguised as a present. A gift from Al could mean a few things, and none of them were good. It could mean you were now owned by him, a walking, talking piece of property. It could mean you were being marked, with the car acting as a tracking device for his hitmen. Or, in the worst-case scenario, it meant the car was rigged to explode the moment you turned the ignition. You can imagine the recipient's fake smile. "Oh, Al, you shouldn't have. Really, I think I'll just walk." 8. What do you do when the law is closing in and your face is on every wanted poster in the country? If you're a gangster, you develop a habit of trying to change your appearance, with often disastrous and gruesome results. The famous bank robber John Dillinger, a contemporary of the mobsters, took this to an extreme. He paid a back-alley doctor to perform plastic surgery on his face and even tried to burn off his fingerprints with acid. It didn't work. He was left in agonizing pain with a slightly altered, lumpy face and fingerprints that were still perfectly identifiable. Other fugitives tried clumsy disguises like cheap wigs and fake mustaches, making them look even more suspicious. It was a desperate, vain attempt to become invisible that usually just made them look like a bad actor in a school play. 9. Let's go back to the Code of Silence, Omerta, because it was more than just a rule. It was a paranoid, all-consuming daily habit that governed every single interaction. You didn't just avoid talking to the cops. You avoided talking about business with anyone, ever. Even mentioning a crime to your own wife in your own kitchen could get you a swift, permanent retirement. This culture of absolute silence was enforced with brutal, bloody consequences, creating a world where everyone was constantly watching what they said, who they talked to, and even what they looked at. It was a state of perpetual, ritualized paranoia. The first rule of Mob Club is, you do not talk about Mob Club. The second rule is, if you break the first rule, you will cease to exist. 10. The first rule of being a criminal is to keep a low profile. These guys took that rule book, lit it on fire, and used it to light their cigars in the middle of the city's fanciest nightclub. They had a habit of being ridiculously public. They weren't hiding in some grimy warehouse. They were ringside at the biggest boxing matches, holding court at the best tables in the most popular restaurants, and getting their pictures in the paper with smiling politicians. It was the strategy of hiding in plain sight. You can't be seen as just a thug if you're constantly rubbing elbows with judges and movie stars. It was a defiant, in-your-face display of power that screamed to the cops and their rivals, "I am the main character in this city, you're all just living in my world." 11. Let's talk about the pinky ring, the most extra piece of jewelry in gangster history. It wasn't just a ring. It was a personality, a lifestyle, a small, shiny announcement that said, "Yes, I commit felonies, but I also have flair." Some were so big they could reflect sunlight into passing airplanes. One guy had a diamond so heavy it made his hand tilt slightly when he talked. Another had initials engraved on it, not his own, but his dog's. And heaven help the person who accidentally shook a mobster's hand too hard and smudged the polish. The pinky ring was sacred. It was also surprisingly versatile. Need to intimidate someone? Tap it loudly on a table. Need to stir your espresso? Guess what's going in the cup? It was fashion. It was function. It was felony bling at its finest. 12. The Tommy gun wasn't just a weapon. It was basically the gangster version of a designer handbag. Loud, flashy, overpriced, and completely impractical. These guys carried them not because they needed to, but because they could. It was less, "I'm here to shoot," and more, "Look how shiny this thing is." Some had custom woodwork. One had mother-of-pearl inlays. Another had a little gold charm hanging off the barrel, like it was a gun, but make it fashion. And let's be honest, they couldn't even aim these things properly. Half the time, they hit more parked cars than enemies. But none of that mattered. The moment you pulled out a Tommy gun, the message was clear. I'm rich, I'm dangerous, and I have absolutely no regard for subtlety or hearing loss. 13. Gangster vanity was off the charts, and they had a habit of putting their initials on everything. Silk shirts, fancy cars, sure. But the real flex? Getting their guns monogrammed. That's right. They paid extra to have their initials elegantly carved into the pearl handle of the pistol they were going to use to commit a felony. This is a level of hold my beer audacity that is just breathtaking. It's not just committing a crime, it's autographing it. It's like a bank robber spray painting his full name on the vault door. It completely defeats the purpose of being a criminal, but it was the ultimate narcissistic power move. The message wasn't just, "You're dead." It was, "You've been killed by someone with taste and very questionable judgment." 14. Some gangsters were all about power, others were about pastry. One infamous Prohibition boss had a habit so bizarre it deserves its own sitcom. He was completely obsessed with cannoli. Not just eating them, ranking them, reviewing them, holding full-on cannoli contests with his crew like it was the Great British Bake Off, but with more gel in their hair and fewer vowels in their words. He'd roll into bakeries wearing a three-piece suit, order one cannoli, take a dramatic bite, then go, "Oh, too much ricotta, I've had better in Jersey." And everyone around him would nod like he just quoted Shakespeare. Rumor has it, he once dumped a girlfriend just because she preferred cream puffs. Imagine building a criminal empire only to risk it all over pastry preferences. Mess with the family? Maybe you'll get a pass. But say cannoli is just okay? Fugged about it. 15. Mobsters were tough guys, sure, but also absolute drama queens. One of their weirdest habits was throwing parties for completely made-up reasons. Not birthdays, not weddings. We're talking celebrations like 3 months since Jimmy got out of jail, or Sal's new cigar smells less like garbage now. They'd rent out a whole restaurant, hire a jazz band, and give toasts like, "To Frankie, for not getting arrested this week." Standing ovation. They even had themed cakes. One famously had a cheesecake with a hand-painted Tommy gun on it made entirely out of fondant. There's something amazing about a room full of guys in pinstriped suits getting emotional over cannoli and fake anniversaries. It's like The Sopranos meets a child's birthday party, except everyone's armed and slightly tipsy. Who needs reasons when you've got booze and balloon animals? 16. You'd think the ultimate power move is a successful hit, but you'd be wrong. The real flex was turning a funeral into a full-blown PR event. When a major gangster died, either from a rival's bullet or a bad cannoli, it became a habit to throw the most extravagant, over-the-top funeral imaginable. Golden caskets that cost more than a house, funeral processions stretching for miles, and so many floral arrangements the entire church smelled like a perfume factory explosion. It was like a state funeral for a man who probably fed his enemies to pigs. This wasn't just mourning. It was a final, defiant show of power. A spectacle designed to remind the city, the police, and their rivals just how big they were, even in death. 17. Beneath the murderous, cold-blooded exterior of some of the world's toughest criminals, there was a surprising soft spot. They were obsessed with their pets. They had a habit of doting on their animals with an affection that was frankly disturbing when contrasted with how they treated human beings. Al Capone famously loved his dog, a Newfoundland named Duke. Other gangsters kept cats, birds, and sometimes even more exotic pets, treating them like furry little kings. These animals often ate better than most of the gangsters' human underlings, enjoying steak dinners while the guy on lookout duty got a cold sandwich. It's a bizarre and deeply humanizing contradiction. A man who wouldn't hesitate to order a murder would then go home and spend an hour cuddling his puppy. 18. Amidst all the violence, paranoia, and chaos, some of the toughest mobsters had a habit that was surprisingly gentle and weird. They were obsessed with breeding and racing pigeons. Seriously.
Top-tier psychopaths like Lucky Luciano and Mike the Boss Teddy would spend hours on rooftops tending to their birds, cooing at them, and entering them in races. For men whose lives were defined by constant stress and the ever-present threat of a bullet to the back of the head, this hobby was a strange, quiet escape. The same hands that signed off on death warrants would gently hold a pigeon. It's a bizarre image that reminds you that even the most hardened criminals are still just weird, complicated humans with a lot of birdseed.
19. One of the most ironic habits of Prohibition-era gangsters was their commitment to selling the absolute worst liquor imaginable. These were the guys who fought and died for the right to sell illegal booze, positioning themselves as heroes of personal freedom. But when they finally got their hands on the supply, what did they sell? Awful, watered-down swill, often mixed with industrial alcohol, paint thinner, and other lovely ingredients to stretch the supply. People literally went blind or died from drinking this garbage. So while they were toasting to the end of government overreach, their customers were busy getting chemical poisoning. It wasn't just crime, it was a do-it-yourself chemical warfare experiment, with the entire drinking public as the lab rats.
20. You would think the first rule of being a successful criminal is to stay anonymous, but you'd be wrong. The first rule, according to paranoid gangsters, was a seating plan. They had a rigid, non-negotiable habit that every single restaurant owner in Chicago and New York knew by heart. Never, ever sit with your back to the door. Every self-respecting mobster had their spot, always a corner table with a clear view of the main entrance, and their back pressed firmly against a solid wall. That way, you could see any potential threats, rival gangs or the police, coming from a mile away, and nobody could sneak up behind you. Every meal, from a simple plate of pasta to a lavish steak dinner, was a tactical operation. If you were a host and tried to seat a gangster anywhere else, congratulations, you probably just became the new owner of a very haunted restaurant. 21. In the world of gangsters, nothing was ever what it seemed. When they said you were getting a promotion, it could mean anything, from taking over a $1 million racket to suddenly being in charge of a fish market in a town with no ocean. One poor guy got sent to supervise operations in North Dakota. There were no operations, just cows and snow, lots of snow. They gave him a fake office, a fake secretary, and a phone that never rang. It was like a witness protection program with better suits. Everyone in the neighborhood thought he was some kind of meat inspector. Meanwhile, he's sitting there every day in a fedora, drinking espresso and waiting for orders that would never come. It was the mob's way of saying, "We don't trust you anymore, but we're also too polite to whack you today. Enjoy your new life as the beef whisperer." 22. Here's a habit that proves even criminal masterminds can be idiots. Many gangsters on the run from the law developed a sudden obsession with changing their identity, not through clever hiding, but through sheer audacity. They'd get fake passports and documents with the most ridiculous aliases imaginable. Sometimes they wouldn't even bother to change their first name, just their last. It's like Al Capone trying to pass himself off as Al Smith. Other times, they'd adopt a persona so comically out of character, it drew more attention to them. Imagine a 6'4" scar-faced enforcer trying to convince people he's a traveling poetry professor. It was a level of overconfidence and poor planning that often led directly to their capture. 23. The hypocrisy of these guys was legendary, especially at home. Many mob bosses cultivated a habit of being absurdly strict fathers, enforcing a weird 1950s TV dad version of family values. Their days might be filled with shootouts, extortion, and dumping bodies in the river. But when they got home, it was a different story. "Junior, what did I say about swearing at the dinner table? Now pass the gravy before I have to go to a business meeting your mother wouldn't approve of." Can you imagine getting a lecture on morality from a man who has more blood on his hands than a clumsy surgeon? It was a delusional attempt to build a wall between their monstrous professional lives and a pure, idealized family life, all under one roof. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. 24. When you live a life of constant violence and sin, you might start thinking about your eternal resume as the end approaches. Mobster Dutch Schultz took this to a truly bizarre extreme. As he lay dying in a hospital bed, Riddled with bullets from a rival gang, he made a frantic last-ditch effort to get right with the man upstairs. He demanded a priest be brought to his bedside for an emergency baptism. This from a man who spent his life extorting, murdering, and probably shaking down the local church for protection money. It was the most awkward religious conversion in history. Was it genuine repentance, or just the ultimate Hail Mary? A desperate attempt to find a loophole in the whole "thou shalt not kill" commandment? Either way, he was trying to hedge his bets with God at the last possible second.
25. Sometimes gangsters got so into playing businessmen they forgot they were actually criminals. One crew opened a consulting firm and started charging other criminals for advice. Real advice, like seminars. Picture this: a smoky room, 10 guys with slicked back hair and pinky rings, and a flip chart that says, Step 1, don't get caught. They even had business cards. Vito Mancini, strategic problem solver. Their clients were other mobsters who paid thousands to be told, change your license plate, and maybe don't shoot people in front of a cop. It was like a TED Talk with more chain smoking and fewer PowerPoints. One guy tried to trademark his kidnapping technique. Another offered a loyalty program. Every fifth extortion's on the house. Honestly, it wasn't organized crime. It was disorganized consulting. 26. And finally, let's talk about the business cards again. Capone's used furniture dealer card was a classic, but this was a widespread habit. Other gangsters had cards that listed them as salesmen, import-export specialists, or my personal favorite, art dealers. These guys, who wouldn't know a Picasso from a pizza, were handing out cards claiming they were connoisseurs of fine art. It was the ultimate symbol of their delusional world. They saw themselves not as thugs, but as legitimate, sophisticated businessmen who just happened to solve their commercial disputes with a Tommy gun. It was a complete fantasy, but it was a fantasy they committed to with every fiber of their being. 27. Picture this: a group of guys named Knuckles, Frankie 2 Times, and Jimmy the Weasel, whose idea of culture is knowing which gun makes the loudest noise, are forced to sit through a 3-hour opera. This wasn't a joke. It was a mandatory corporate outing for some mob families. The bosses, desperate to look sophisticated, had a habit of dragging their thugs to the opera to absorb some class. You can just see them sweating in their tuxedos, fidgeting, and trying to look deeply moved by a high C, all while thinking about the guy they have to whack after the show. You can almost hear the boss whispering, "Look fascinated by Puccini, or you're going to be the tragic ending to this opera." It was the clumsiest, most painful attempt at rebranding in history. So, there you have it. Behind the fedoras and the shootouts were deeply superstitious, paranoid, and often ridiculously petty men. Their lives were a bizarre mix of extreme violence and even more extreme weirdness. Now I have to ask you, which of these habits is the most absurdly shocking to you? And which modern-day CEO or celebrity do you think secretly has some Prohibition-era gangster habits? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more dives into the weirdest corners of history